This experience happened when I was a little boy, about 7 to 8 years old. I shared a room and a bunk bed with my sister. I had the bottom bunk, and she had the top. It was late at night, around 1 to 4 a.m., when I woke up from a dreamless sleep. I woke up facing the wall, and everything seemed normal until I turned around and saw a figure at the end of my bed. At first, it was blurry, but as my vision adjusted, I saw it was a man about 6 feet tall, leaning on the bunk bed and smoking a cigar. He didn't look at me, but I knew he was aware of my presence. I didn't make any noise, fearing that he would notice I was awake. He might have known, but he didn't turn to look at me. I couldn't see his whole face, just his side profile, and I could tell he was an older man. He stood there as if he was deep in thought, occasionally taking a drag from his cigar. It was strange because, even though I could clearly see the smoke and the cigar lighting up, I couldn't smell anything. I gently turned back around, trying to make it seem like I was just shifting in my sleep, and faced the wall. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my eyes shut tight. I could still hear the sound of the cigar burning, but there was no smell. Eventually, the sounds stopped, and after a little while, I summoned the courage to turn back around. He was gone, just like that. There was no noise from the door opening, no footsteps. He had simply vanished. I got up right away and ran to my parents' room to tell them what had happened. They showed concern, but didn't really say whether or not they believed me. Both my sister and I slept in my parents' room that night. As I've gotten older, my dad still remembers that night and has told me he always believed me. He mentioned that he'd experienced strange things in the house as well. One particular incident happened when he was home alone. He had fallen asleep on the living room couch, and it was late at night when he woke up to noises coming from the kitchen. He could hear drawers opening and silverware clattering, but no one else was home. He said he kept the lights off and sat up, then spoke out loud, saying something like, "I'm not scared of you. Leave." After that night, he said he never experienced anything unusual again. I'll preface my story by mentioning that my dad, a prominent surgeon in California in his time, had a business partner, also a surgeon, who was one of the victims of the Golden State Killer. This happened before I was born, and growing up, I never knew about the story, nor understood why my dad was such a paranoid helicopter parent. Years later, I found out about it, and learned that my dad had several experiences that led him to believe he, like his business partner, was being stalked by Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. Now in retrospect, I believe what happened to me was part of that. When I was 5 years old, my mom and I were home alone in a house we had just moved into. My dad was away on a business trip. I was in the kitchen watching Harry and the Hendersons, and my mom was upstairs in her room. The kitchen was pretty big, and the TV was in a nook in the corner. There was a couch right next to the TV, but it was against the wall and facing out, not toward the TV. So, I was sitting on the floor with my back against the side of the couch, about 2 feet from the TV, staring up at it. There was a massive picture window next to the TV, but I imagined that no one looking inside would have seen me sitting on the ground in the corner. On the opposite side of the room from the couch was a door to the garage. It had one of those long, flat handles. As I was sitting there, I began to hear a creaking sound and looked over to see the handle moving up and down. I still get chills remembering being alone in that big dark room, illuminated only by the flickering of the TV, and seeing that handle moving by itself. As soon as it stopped, I leapt up and sprinted up the stairs, screaming to my mom that someone was trying to get into the house. She was upstairs with the windows open, and we both heard the crunching sound of feet running away on the driveway. She immediately called the police, and they came out to search the property, but found nothing. They chalked it up to just being a prowler. I count my lucky stars every day that the door was locked. The scariest part is that there were 2 doors to the garage, one on the kitchen side and another on the opposite side of the stairs, leading from a laundry room into the garage. And we later found that the second door was unlocked. It was pure chance that the person tried the locked door first and got scared off before trying the other one. I truly believe that if they hadn't heard me scream and run up the stairs, they would have made it inside. It now makes sense why we moved 6 times before I turned 5. Considering that my dad had experienced break-ins at 2 other homes in the same neighborhood, where nothing was taken, but it was clear someone had forcibly entered, I think it was a distinct possibility that we were being stalked. D'Angelo wasn't caught until 2018. I don't even know where to start, to be honest. It's all a gigantic mess in my head, and my ADHD makes it pretty hard to put my emotions and thoughts into words. But hey, let me try anyway. I found this amazing sub not too long ago, just a few days back, and I immediately liked it, since I'm drawn to the paranormal and things humans can't explain, things beyond our comprehension. I noticed that biblically accurate angels are often discussed here, and as I was going through some of these posts, I found one where OP mentioned being terrified by these entities, particularly the wheel-shaped ones. He also stated that his fear worsened after reading a near-death experience from someone who encountered something eerily similar to this wheel type of angel. I think its official name in the Bible is Ophanim, but correct me if I'm wrong. I've linked the NDE for you guys. I'd strongly advise you to read it. It will be important for the rest of my story. Here are some important quotes for those too lazy to read. Across from the front of the car on the left, in almost the opposite direction to the oncoming vehicle, was a field. I suddenly became aware of a very large object approaching slowly on a diagonal across this field. It was coming directly toward my car. Time was not functioning normally while this was happening, if it was functioning at all. I had the space to notice this happening, but I can't explain how I was able to do that. The object, when I first saw it, appeared to be about the size of a 10-floor tower block. It subjectively seemed to be about 200 or 300 yards across the field. These size and distance descriptions are meaningless, as I'll try to explain in a moment. The object resembled a giant water wheel, lying on its side and rotating as it approached me and my vehicle. I had seen the object before I was born, and I will see it again when I die. We all knew it before we were born. We will all see it when we die. The last quote gave me chills because it sounds so familiar to me. In the near-death experience, the person encountered a wheel-like entity that seems to be responsible for our reality and how we perceive it. It was an incredibly disturbing and hard to describe experience, and the person vividly described it, suggesting that it had a great impact on them. It doesn't seem made up. What makes me think this NDE is authentic is that after I read it, I started looking for similar stories, and I found many, although most were drug trip reports. A lot of people who have seen this ominous wheel or ophoneme, or whatever you want to call it, report feeling déjà vu, as well as a range of emotions, from pure terror and fear to bliss or calmness. I emphasize the déjà vu part because it will be important in my personal experience, which I'll share with you soon. So, apparently, there are a certain number of people who claim to have seen ophonym or ophonym-like beings during drug trips, or NDEs. They don't always look exactly the same, but they evoke similar feelings of déjà vu and Lovecraftian terror. Now I'll share my view on this and my personal experiences. I'm a male in my 20s, and ever since I was a kid, I've been terrified of huge things. Megalophobia, especially eyes. For example, my grandmother had an encyclopedia about animals, and there was a photo of a giant owl that made me feel really uneasy. It was the owl's giant eyes and general appearance, the feathers, its size, that scared me. Sound familiar? Feathers, eyes, size, like biblically accurate angels. I'm also arachnophobic, but this fear is different. It feels like it stems from something I saw before I was born, something primal and not linked to a traumatic childhood event. As I grew up, I discovered cosmic horror, mostly associated with H.P. Lovecraft, and I was both intrigued and terrified. It finally put into words the fear I'd been feeling all my life. Cosmic horror deals with things beyond our understanding, the kind of knowledge that could drive someone insane. I also learned about biblically accurate angels, and the first time I saw an image of a seraphim, I was scared to death. I felt the same prenatal fear I'd always had. It looked so incomprehensible and out of place, like something Lovecraftian. Staring at it too long felt like it could drive me insane. Now, on to my story. Actually, two stories. The first one helps add authenticity to the second. When I was 12 or 13, some friends and I used to share creepy stories that happened to us. One evening, we met at a friend's house, and a girl, let's call her Sophia for anonymity, told us about visiting her grandparents abroad. She said they had a weird neighbor who gave off creepy vibes, always greeting her in a way that made her uncomfortable. She was about 10 at the time. She went up to the attic one day and heard the voice of this neighbor coming from behind a stack of boxes. She saw him standing there and heard him say, "Sophia, come to me." Naturally, she freaked out and ran downstairs to tell her grandparents. They were shocked and told her that couldn't be possible. The neighbor had died 2 weeks earlier. Sophia never described the neighbor in detail. I remember her just saying he was an old guy with a walking stick. No mention of what he wore, his hairstyle, or anything else. That night, after hearing her story, I went home feeling unsettled. I had a dream where I was floating bodiless in front of a doorway or window. In the doorway stood an old man with a receding hairline, gray hair, a mustache, glasses, a green shirt with brown stripes, and brown pants. He was just standing there facing the doorframe, not acknowledging me at all. Then I heard a voice, neither male nor female, say, "Ask Sophia if this was the man she saw." It repeated the sentence again. I woke up, and all I could think about was telling Sophia about this dream. When I did, her face went pale. She confirmed that the man I described was exactly how her neighbor looked when she saw him in the attic. I was terrified, as you can imagine, and couldn't sleep for a week. Now, on to the second dream, which was even more terrifying. About a month after this, I dreamed of floating in an endless white void. I was just there, in front of a massive eyeball, planet-sized but somehow fully visible to me. The eye had a blue iris and was staring directly at me, piercing my soul. I was utterly terrified. This time, the scene felt disturbingly familiar, like déjà vu, just like in the NDEs I had read about. I felt like I had seen this before but couldn't remember it. It was deeply unsettling, as if my entire understanding of reality was wrong. The fear was indescribable. Then I heard the same voice from my earlier dream say, "This is what you see before you are born." The scene shifted, the eye's iris turned red, and the voice continued, "And this is what you see after you die." Then the dream ended. When I woke up, I was traumatized. My concept of reality felt shattered, like I had accidentally learned the truth about existence. It felt like this eye and voice belonged to a higher power responsible for our universe. To this day, I still have nightmares about beings like this Lovecraftian eyeball, always accompanied by that same primal, familiar fear. However, I've only ever heard the voice in those two dreams, which is why I see them as significant. It's disturbing that the same voice appeared in both dreams, the one about the neighbor and the one about the giant eyeball. I have so many questions, and reading NDEs and drug trip reports makes it even worse. I feel like these beings, whether they're angels or something else, exist in a different realm, only visible before we're born, after we die, or through certain substances. Whatever they are, they seem linked to the reason for our existence and reality, and that terrifies me to the core.